The pantry running empty was not an emergency. That is the first correction, and it changes the shape of everything that follows. It happened every single year on roughly the same schedule, and everybody in the house knew months in advance that it was coming. Late February through April, the smokehouse thinning, the cellar down to sprouting potatoes, the canned goods gone, and nothing having grown out of the ground in 5 months. So going to the woods was not panic. It was not improvisation. It was a scheduled harvest with a calendar as strict as the gardens, and the people doing it knew what came up in which week, on which slope, at which elevation, in what order. Foraging was not what you did when the plan failed. Foraging was the plan. It was simply the part of the plan that did not happen in a field. And here is what this video is actually about. The single most important wild food in these mountains. The one that fed the people, fattened the hogs, fed the deer and the turkey and the bear that the people then ate, and brought in cash on top of all that, no longer exists. It was not over-harvested. Nobody cut it down. It was killed by a fungus that was first noticed in New York City in 1904, and within about 50 years, it had taken roughly 4 billion trees. We will get there. First the calendar, then the greens, then the ones that could hurt you. And one of them is now illegal to sell, then the forest itself, and then what happened to it. Every subsistence food system on Earth has a lean season, and in the southern mountains it lands in early spring. This feels backwards to modern people who associate hunger with winter. But winter is not the problem. Winter is when the smokehouse is full, the cellar is stocked, the crocks are sour, and the shuck beans are hanging in the sack. The household in December is at its richest. The problem is February to April, and the arithmetic is simple. You have been eating from a fixed store since October with nothing coming in. Whatever you put up, you have been drawing down for 4 or 5 months. And the garden, the actual garden, will not produce anything meaningful until May or June. That is the gap. Somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks where the stored food is running out and the grown food has not started. Now look at what has been eaten for those 5 months. Cornbread, salt pork, beans, potatoes, whatever kraut and dried apples are left, storable, filling and, critically, almost entirely lacking in anything fresh. Which means the gap is not only a calorie problem, it is a nutrient problem. And by March, a household has been without fresh vegetables for as long as a body can comfortably manage. And that is exactly the week the woods start producing. This is the piece of timing that makes the whole system work, and it is not luck. Wild spring ephemerals, the plants that leaf out early on the forest floor, do it precisely because they must complete their growth before the tree canopy closes overhead and cuts off their light. They are racing the leaves, which means the forest's earliest, most abundant, most nutritious growth arrives in exactly the weeks the human pantry is emptiest. The mountains did not invent that alignment, they just noticed it over a very long time by people paying close attention to a small piece of ground and built a calendar around it. They called what came out of it the spring tonic, and that phrase gets treated as folk superstition, as though people simply believed greens were good for them. They were right, and chapter 2 is why. The word in the mountains is sallet, and it is not salad. A sallet is cooked greens, usually simmered with a piece of pork, and the liquid left in the pot is kept and eaten, not poured out. Here is what a family went out for, roughly in the order it appears. Creasy greens, upland cress. The first thing on the list, and the first thing up. Because it is so cold hardy, it will push through in late winter and can be gathered while there is still frost in the ground. In much of the region, creasy's arriving is the announcement that the gap is ending. Peppery, sharp, and gathered by the sackful. And they remain enough of an institution that parts of Appalachia still hold creasy green festivals. Ramps, Allium tricoccum, wild leek, broad flat leaves coming up in rich damp coves, a strong garlic onion bite, and a smell that stays with a person for days. Which is why ramp season generated its own folklore about children being sent home from school. The bulb and the leaf are both eaten, fried with potatoes, or with eggs. And note how the Cherokee gather them, because it becomes important later. The traditional method cuts the bulb rather than pulling the whole plant, leaving the root system in the ground to regrow. Sochan, cut leaf coneflower, Rudbeckia laciniata, a Cherokee staple green gathered in early spring when the young leaf resembles a turkey's foot and blanched and fried. It has a long, unbroken history of use, and it is going to come back at the end of this video for a reason nobody would have predicted. Branch lettuce, sassafras, growing along mountain streams, hence the name. Gathered young and often served killed lettuce, wilted under hot pork grease with a splash of vinegar, which is one of the genuinely great mountain dishes and takes about 4 minutes. And then the whole supporting cast, gathered together and cooked together. Dock, dandelion, lamb's quarters, plantain, chickweed, watercress, wild mustard, violet leaves, sorrel. The phrase people used was going out to gather a mess of greens, and it usually meant a mixture because you took what was up. Now the nutrition, because this is where the folk wisdom turns out to be simply correct. Wild spring greens are, in general, dense in vitamin C, in vitamin A as beta-carotene, in folate, in vitamin K, in iron and calcium and potassium. And many of them beat cultivated garden vegetables on these measures, rather than merely matching them. Now put that against the diet described in Chapter 1. 5 months of cornmeal, pork fat and dried beans is a diet that runs low on precisely those things. Vitamin C cannot be stored in the body for long. Vitamin A reserves deplete. What people described as a heaviness in the blood that needed clearing in spring was a real physiological state, described in the vocabulary available. The tonic was not a superstition dressed up as medicine. It was medicine described as a tonic. But the woods do not hand this over safely. Some of what went into the pot in March could put you on the floor. And the household knew it and had a procedure. Poke sallet is the famous one, and it deserves its reputation in both directions. Pokeweed, Phytolacca americana, is a large perennial that comes up early, grows enormous, and produces dark purple berries in grape-like clusters. It grows everywhere in the eastern United States. Field edges, fence lines, road ditches, disturbed ground. It is abundant, obvious, and comes up early, which is exactly why people ate it. It is also poisonous. Every part of the plant contains toxic compounds, triterpenoid saponins, including phytolactotoxin, along with a lectin and a ribosome inactivating protein. The root is the most toxic part and should never be eaten under any circumstances. The seeds inside the berries are highly toxic, and critically, toxicity increases as the plant matures through the season, which means the same plant that is marginally edible in early April is genuinely dangerous by June. The traditional preparation is a direct response to all of that. and it is more sophisticated than it looks. Gather only the young shoots in early spring, before the stems redden, the point at which toxin levels are lowest. Then boil them. Pour the water off completely, add fresh water, and boil again. Some households did it 3 times. The toxins are water-soluble. Each boil pulls more out, and the water goes down the yard, never to the pot and never to the hogs. Now be honest about how well that works, because the sources are honest about it. Poison control centers note that gastrointestinal symptoms are still reported in people who followed the double boil method. So the procedure reduces the risk substantially. It does not eliminate it. And the actual scale, which is worth stating plainly rather than sensationalizing. A study of every pokeweed exposure reported in Kentucky between 2000 and 2019 found 1,669 cases, of which 239 produced any adverse effect at all, mostly abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting and diarrhea, and no deaths. Most exposures involved the berries, and most were unintentional. So, pokeweed is the plant most frequently reported to American poison centers. It makes people genuinely sick, and it is at the mild end of the poisonous plant spectrum. Prepared correctly by someone who was taught, it fed families for generations. Prepared by someone guessing off the internet, it is a bad evening. Then there is the one that is now illegal to sell, sassafras. The root bark brewed into a reddish tea, drunk across the rural South as the classic spring tonic. The thing you took to clean out your system after winter. Same tree that gave root beer its original flavor. In the late 1950s, FDA studies found that saffrole, which makes up roughly 80% of sassafras root bark oil, caused liver tumors in rats and mice. On that basis, the agency banned saffrole as a food additive in 1960 and later specifically banned sassafras bark used for tea. An unusual step, because the FDA has rarely pulled a naturally occurring food off the market over a compound inside it. Saffrole is now also a controlled precursor chemical because it is used in illicit MDMA manufacture. And here is the honest version, which is more interesting than either it's poison or the government overreached. The rodent studies used very high doses. The National Toxicology Programme's position is that saffrole is reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen, which is a careful phrase, not a settled one. There is supporting human evidence from betel quid users who consume substantial saffrole and show elevated oral cancer rates. That is not the same as a cup of tea, and it is not nothing either. So a plant that hundreds of thousands of people drank every spring for 2 centuries is now regulated out of the food supply on evidence that is real but contested. Whether that is prudence or overcaution is a genuine argument, and this video is not going to pretend it is settled. The general principle underneath all of this, the mountain forager's safety system, was not a field guide. It was a person, somebody who had been taught on the ground by somebody else, which plant, which week, which part, how many boils. Take that person away, and the same woods become dangerous, because several of the best wild foods have lookalikes that will hurt you badly. That transmission is the actual technology, not the plant list. A plant list is what you write down after the person who knew is gone. Now, the greens are only the opening act. The real pantry is not on the ground. Spring greens close the gap. But the wild food that actually mattered, in volume, arrived in autumn, and it came off trees. The nuts, hickory in several species with shagbark the prize. Sweet, oily, and worth the considerable labor of cracking. Black walnut which stains your hands for a week and tastes like nothing else. Butternut, hazelnut, acorns from white oak, lectured of tannin and used as meal. Nuts are dense in fat and protein. They store for months in the shell, and they arrive precisely when the year is turning cold. The fruit. Pawpaw, the largest fruit native to North America. Custard textured, tropical tasting, ripening in late summer and refusing to keep for more than a few days, which is why almost nobody outside the region has eaten one. Persimmon, which is astringent enough to turn your mouth inside out until it goes fully soft and then becomes a candy. Wild grapes, fox and muscadine, blackberries, raspberries, dewberries, huckleberries, elderberries, wild plums, crab apples, serviceberry, which ripens early enough to have supplied fruit in the very same hungry weeks as the greens. The fungi, morels in April, in the same weeks as the greens, and hunted with the same seriousness people now reserve for deer season. Chicken of the woods, hen of the woods, chanterelles later. High value, zero storage requirement, and, as with the greens, utterly dependent on somebody having taught you. Morel spots were, and remain, family secrets that get inherited rather than shared. The animals, squirrel, rabbit, groundhog, possum, turkey, deer, and fish out of the branch. Squirrel in particular is easy to underrate now. It was a genuine everyday protein, hunted by children as much as adults, and squirrel and dumplings was a real dinner rather than a novelty. And now the point that reorganizes the chapter, because it ties the plants and the animals together into one system. The game was not separate from the forest crop. The game was the forest crop, converted. Deer, turkey, bear, squirrel, and raccoon all fatten on the autumn nutfall, what foresters call the mast. And so did the family's hogs, which in the open range system of these mountains were turned loose into unfenced woods with a notch cut in the ear, left to feed themselves all year on nuts and acorns, and rounded up in the autumn to be butchered. Read that again. The mountain family's pork, the fatback, the ham, the lard, the single most important stored food in the house, was manufactured by the forest for free, out of nuts, while nobody was looking. And one more thing came out of these woods that was not eaten at all. Ginseng, dug from shady north-facing slopes, dried and sold, for cash, into a trade running to China that had existed since the 18th century. Along with it, golden seal, bloodroot, black cohosh, May apple, the botanical trade. For a household with almost no cash income, digging sang was one of the very few ways to convert time in the woods into money. So the forest supplied greens in spring, fruit and nuts in autumn, meat all year, the hogs that filled the smokehouse, and the cash that bought the salt and the coffee. That was the real pantry. The one in the house was just where a portion of it was stored. Which is why what happened next was not an inconvenience. It was a structural collapse. Walk into an Appalachian forest today and count the trees. Oak, maple, tulip poplar, hickory, pine. Now understand that you are looking at a replacement forest. The American chestnut, Castanea dentata, once accounted for roughly 1 in 4 trees across the southern Appalachian hardwood forest, and on some slopes, far more than that. Mature trees reached enormous size and lived for centuries. And what made it the keystone of everything in Chapter 4 was not its size, it was its reliability. Oaks are mast cyclical. Some years an oak stand produces heavily, other years it produces almost nothing, and that variation propagates straight through the animals that depend on it. The chestnut did not do that. It flowered late, after the spring frosts that wreck an oak crop, and it produced abundantly, sweetly, and every year. For a household whose hogs, game, winter nuts, and cash income all traced back to the nutfall, a tree that never failed was not one resource among many. It was the flaw under all of them. Historians of the region have put it bluntly. For marginal mountain homesteads, the chestnut was frequently the difference between subsistence and starvation. It was cash, too. By 1909, roughly 600 million board feet of chestnut timber was being cut annually, and the nuts themselves went out by the rail car to supply eastern cities. A genuine harvest economy, with mountain families gathering and selling. In 1904, a forester at the New York Zoological Park in the Bronx noticed cankers on the chestnuts. The fungus was Cryphonectria parasitica, introduced on imported Asian nursery stock. In Asia, where the trees had co-evolved with it, it was a minor parasite. In North America, it met a tree with no resistance whatsoever. It moved at something like 50 miles a year, faster than anyone could respond to, and there was no response available anyway. By 1940, the chestnut was finished as a commercial species. By around 1950, functionally extinct as a canopy tree across its entire range. Estimates of the death toll run to 3 to 4 billion trees. Understand what that meant on the ground, over roughly a single human lifetime. The most dependable food source in the forest, gone. The hog feed that filled the smokehouse without costing anything, gone. The mast that carried the deer and turkey populations, destabilized, replaced by oak mast that fails some years. A cash crop from both nuts and timber, gone, and an enormous quantity of standing dead timber, which the timber companies came and cut. The tree is not entirely extinct. Root systems survive and throw up sprouts that grow for a few years, get infected, and die back before they can ever produce nuts. A species reduced to an understory shrub that cannot reproduce. Breeding and biotechnology programs are working on resistant trees, and it is genuinely unresolved whether they will succeed. And here is the closing turn, because the pressure did not stop in 1950. Ginseng populations across the southern mountains have declined under harvest pressure. Roughly 90% of wild American ginseng ends up crossing the Pacific, to the point that national forests in North Carolina and Tennessee suspended issuing harvest permits entirely, with officials stating flatly that restricted permitting had not reversed the decline. Ramps have gone from a mountain spring staple to a restaurant delicacy, and the demand has followed. In Great Smoky Mountains National Park, ramps are uncommon, and poaching is an active problem. And the most interesting development in this whole story is the one nobody would have written. In 2019, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park finalized an agreement with the eastern band of Cherokee Indians, restoring the right of tribal members to gather sochan inside the park, one of the first such agreements in the national park system. Permitted gatherers take a limited quantity in season and share a portion with other tribal members. Then researchers measured what the traditional harvest did to the plants. Cherokee gathering methods were found to increase sochan seed production. not damage the population, improve it. And the same question is now being studied for ramps, using the traditional method of cutting the bulb rather than pulling the plant, with early indications that it may be sustainable, which is the thing this whole video has been circling. The mountains did not have a wild pantry because the woods happened to be generous. They had one because generations of people, Cherokee first and longest, and the settler families who learned from them, knew which plant, which week, which part, and how much to leave. That last piece is the entire discipline, and it is the piece that vanishes first when knowledge stops being handed down and a plant becomes a commodity. So, what did mountain families forage when the pantry ran empty? Creasy greens and ramps and sochan and branch lettuce in March. Poke boiled twice, carefully. Morels in April. Berries through the summer. Pawpaws and persimmons in the fall. Hickory nuts and walnuts and acorns. Ginseng for cash. And under all of it, the chestnut, the tree that fed the family, fed the hogs, fed the game, and never missed a year. The pantry never actually ran empty. There were two of them, and the big one had no walls. The one in the house is still there. The other one got smaller, and most of that happened inside a single lifetime, while people who could name every plant in it watched it go.